rather short gospel passage this morning. Julie hates when I start off that way because it means I'm going to talk a long time. It's a brief scene of Jesus healing 10 lepers. But in this brief passage, we are given an opportunity to consider several things: faithfulness, awareness, and thankfulness. Quite a bit in just a few words. Now, right from the beginning, we see faithfulness at work. 10 lepers cry out to Jesus to heal them from a safe distance away. You see, their leprosy had made them unclean, and they were obliged to stay apart from others in the community so as not to defile anyone else. And take a moment and consider what a lonely and separated life that would have been. Near, but never part of what was going on. Alive, but on the margins. Quite literally outcasts from the town. It's fair to say they would have been desperate to rejoin and to be welcomed back into the community that they were not good enough to be part of in their current states. And it's not unfair to assume that desperation had led them to seek any of a number of cures and healings, which apparently had failed to make them whole. And yet here was Christ, whom they call Master. Even though they would have only heard stories about his itinerant ministry. But regardless, they called out and asked to be made whole. Even stacked on what could have been other disappointments and failures, they had faith that Jesus could make them well. And so they acted. And remember, as we discussed last week, faith is about action. Jesus has mercy on them and sends them on their way to the local priest to show them the healing that occurred along the way. And by the way, that is exactly what would have been required of them to rejoin the local community. It was the priest who had to declare them clean and free of their leprosy. In going to the religious leader, they were fulfilling what they needed to do to meet the obligations that would return them to society. Which is where our next topic for today comes up: awareness. One of the 10, a Samaritan at that, sees he is healed. Even without external validation, he has an awareness of being made whole. And note here, the other 9, they weren't doing anything wrong. They were following societal expectations. They were even following Jesus' own command. But it does seem like their awareness was lacking. Who knows, perhaps it was the Samaritan's status of being an other, even removed from leprosy, that would have caused him to see even more fully just what was going on. He was being restored, not just in body, but in mind and soul as well. He was being brought back into the full community. And from there, he demonstrates our last topic for today: thankfulness. In his actions and words, the man proclaims his thankfulness for being made whole. And he doesn't do so, by the way, theoretically or nice and quietly in his head. He goes directly to Jesus and engages him with thanks. This wasn't a throwaway action wasn't just trying to meet some expectation. Through faith and awareness, the man knew God and made him whole. And he wanted to cry out that gratitude with the fullness of his entire being. Now, as we move from a couple thousand years ago all the way back up to today, there are some lessons that I pray we can recognize and take with us from our gospel passage. When it comes to faithfulness, the lepers didn't give up. They didn't just resign themselves to be separate, to be at arm's length. There's a true and healthy sense of self-worth in their actions. And a healthy sense as well of the boldness that it took for them to cry out to Jesus. They believed that they were worthy of being made whole, being restored to their society. So they acted to ask, maybe even demand that they receive healing. I think the oven is preheated. We have plenty of folks all around us who, for any of a number of reasons, are in similar spots today. Absolutely, disease can separate folks. There's plenty of other issues too. You can easily point to things like identity, sexuality, a plethora of things from various ideologies as well. That can carve us up into different groups and subsets. Our world is full of reasons and ways for folks to identify themselves as being an other. And when those folks are faithful, when they're bold, as the lepers were in our gospel, we do need to see them. We need to acknowledge them and work with Christ to bring them to fullness and inclusion. See, too often our world responds in these situations and seeks to make the ones crying out for inclusion into even more of another. Regardless, by the way, of if that cry comes from left, comes from right, in any direction you want, it doesn't really matter. Our world seems to work diligently, and by the way, pretty darn effectively, at separating and excluding, at pushing apart, at keeping us from seeing that we are all children of God. I pray that we don't. I pray that we seek ways to bring together, ways to restore. Now, awareness is just as important to us today as well. If Christ works in our lives, when Christ works in our lives, in those of God's kingdom's life, and works to bring healing in life, we need to recognize that. We need to see when God's will and action is alive in our own lives, the lives of those around us. And if we miss that, we run the risk of getting stuck in bitterness or sometimes in entitlement when it comes to those blessings that all of us receive. It's easy to think things like, well, that blessing wasn't really that good. Really wanted something else. Or maybe even, well, That's just because of my own actions. I did that myself. God wasn't involved. I pray that when we're healed, I pray that when we're restored, I pray that when we're made even fuller, that we see God full and present in the action. And finally, I pray that thankfulness is something that we put at the forefront of our lives. Let us never take for granted the love of God and the love of God's kingdom. And let us be explicit and bold in our thankfulness. We should leave no doubt that we have seen God's healing hand. We've witnessed and felt and participated in the grace of God. Grace that we didn't earn, grace that we didn't deserve. Let thankfulness be a cornerstone of our lives each and every day. See, today I pray that we will be faithful, that we will be aware, that we will be thankful in our lives. I pray as well that our church embodies those same attributes as well. And we find ourselves each day at the foot of Christ, just like the Samaritan woman, praising Him and thanking Him for the wholeness and restoration in our lives. Amen.